Hello, all praise to Jesus Christ, the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. So, in the last video, I showed you a bit of history, a bit of Mystery Babylon type stuff, and I'm going to go into that type of thing from a different perspective, or similar but different perspective. We'll start off sort of where we left off, and then we'll go in a different direction, and I'm going to show you some religions, some old religions, let's say. When we're looking at this stuff, ignore all the dates. Generally speaking, when you're looking at the past, ignore the dates because the history has been changed from what it actually is. Of course, we know that the Earth is only about 6,000 years old approximately, and so the timeline is very different. The biblical timeline is very different to the scientific timeline. So just ignore the dates. The relationships between things are more important than the precise dates. So if something happened before something else, then it happened before that. But don't worry about the specific dates and rely on the Bible as well. Use the Bible as your foundation, and if something contradicts with the Bible, go with the Bible. Don't worry too much about the names. There are going to be a lot of names in what I'm talking about here because we're going to be looking at a lot of different religions. I will go into some of the names. I'm going to take you on a journey, and there's a point to be made by the end of this video, but don't worry, I'm going to be reading things to you, and a lot of it's probably going to go over your head. It still goes over my head. Like there's a lot of connections, a lot of wires going out and everywhere, a lot of things you can explore in this topic. So don't get lost. Don't worry too much. The important things should still come through. The details of the religions as well. And these religions are all basically perversions on the truth. And so some of the details might sound familiar to you, some of them not so much, but don't worry too much about the details. The point is not that you learn what all of the ancient religions are. The point is that just to look at the relationships between them and get some idea of where they're coming from and stuff like that. So don't worry too much. Sort of like in the last video, I showed you a bunch of things and I didn't go into too much detail explaining them. I just sort of said, look at these things, see, just see the relationships between them. That's sort of what we're going to be doing again in this video. So stay humble, don't get lost. This is Mystery Babylon type stuff we're going into. It can be very confusing, but very interesting as well. But just be careful about it. So start off with some scripture. Genesis 6, and it came to pass, when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were fair, and they took them wives of all which they chose. And the Lord said, My spirit shall not always strive with man, for that he is also flesh, yet his days shall be 120 years. There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children unto them. The same became mighty men which were of old, men of renown. And God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was evil continually. So the important thing to note there, which is going to be relevant to what we're talking about now, is the sons of God coming to the daughters of men, bearing children to them. The same became mighty men which were of old, men of renown. So there was men of renown in the antediluvian times. It's important to know that as the beginning of what we're talking about, so the earlier part of the history that we're talking about. There were people back in those days which were men of renown. Now, in the last video, we talked a bit about eagles and about winged discs and things, and I'm not. We didn't go too far into that, but one of the things we talked about was the Assyrian, and so I'm going to read a bit from Micah 5 here, and I'll explain where I'm going as we go along. Now gather thyself in troops, O daughter of troops. He hath laid siege against us. They shall smite the judge of Israel with a rod upon the cheek. But thou, Bethlehem Ephratah, though thou be little among the thousands of Judah, yet out of thee shall he come forth unto me, that is to be ruler in Israel, whose goings forth have been from of old, from everlasting. And we know who that is. We know who came from Bethlehem, who is going to be ruler in Israel, whose goings forth have been from old, from everlasting. We're talking about Jesus here. Therefore will he give them up until the time that she which travaileth hath brought forth. Then the remnant of his brethren shall return unto the children of Israel. So until the time which she travaileth hath brought forth, very reminiscent of Revelation chapter 12, when talking about the woman who's in travail, about to bring forth, and Satan's ready to get the child, devour the child as soon as it's born, but it's caught up to heaven. So we're talking about that she which travaileth is, I guess, the nation of Israel, or Jerusalem, perhaps, or I would say the nation of Israel. And the child would be us, as in the Gentiles, or not necessarily the Gentiles, the people who believe in Jesus, the church, the people who believe in Jesus. So it's talking about that time. It's talking about the time in Revelation, the Jacob's trouble. And he shall stand and feed in the strength of the Lord, in the majesty of the name of the Lord his God, and they shall abide, for now shall he be great unto the ends of the earth. And this man shall be the peace, when the Assyrian shall come into our land, when he shall tread in our places. Then shall we raise against him 7 shepherds and 8 principal men, and they shall lay waste the land of Assyria with the sword, and the land of Nimrod in the entrances thereof. Thus shall he deliver us from the Assyrian, when he cometh into our land, and when he treadeth within our borders. It's talking about the Assyrian, and also mentioned Nimrod there. So just worth remembering those 2 names. Where do they come from? We go to Genesis 10. And the sons of Ham, Cush, and Mitzrayim, and Phut, and Canaan. So Mitzrayim's Egypt. Canaan were the Canaanites were the ones who were living in the land of Israel before the Israelites. When Abraham went into there, that's where the Canaanites were, and some of them were giants. And if we skip down to verse 8, and Cush begat Nimrod. He began to be a mighty one on the earth. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord, where it is said, even as Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord. And the beginning of his kingdom was Babel, and Erech, and Akkad, and Calneh in the land of Shinar. And out of that land went forth Asher, and built Nineveh, and the city of Rehoboth and Calneh. And it's also worth noting again at verse 22, the children of Shem, Elam, and Asher, and Arphaxad, and Lud, and Aram. So there we've got mentioned Nimrod, and he's building Babel and Erech, and some of the cities there, and Asher, who is a child of Shem, descended from Shem, building some cities. And we're talking about in the cradle of civilization, and into the Babylonian Chaldean sort of area in Mesopotamia, modern day Iraq. So that's what we're talking about. And we talked in the last video about, I showed some pictures of Asher, the god. I'm just going to read a bit here. I put this on the screen in the last video, but I didn't read it, so I'll just read it now. Asher is an East Semitic god and the head of the Assyrian pantheon in the Mesopotamian region, worshipped mainly in the northern half of Mesopotamia and parts of northeast Syria and southeast Asia Minor, which constituted Old Assyria. He may have had solar iconography. So it's the solar related to the sun. So the legend bit. Asher was a deified form of the city of Asher, which dates from the mid-3rd millennium BC. And ignore the dates. And the dates when you're reading these types of things, this is Wikipedia, it may be accurate, maybe not, but just ignore the dates. And was the capital of the old Assyrian kingdom. As such, Asher did not originally have a family, but as the cult name came under southern Mesopotamian influence, he later came to be regarded as the Assyrian equivalent of Enlil, the chief god of Nippur, which was the most important god of the southern pantheon from the 3rd millennium BC until Hammurabi founded an empire based in Babylon in the mid-da-da-da, after which Marduk replaced Enlil as the chief god of the south. So some things to notice in what I just read. So Asher was a deified form of the city of Asher. So talking about there was a city, and from that city came a god. Asher did not originally have a family. Okay. He later came to be regarded as the Assyrian equivalent of Enlil. So we're talking about Asher is a form of a previous god. And the chief god of Nippur. Nippur also would be a city, which is the most important of the southern pantheon. And based in, after which Marduk replaced Enlil. So we're going to talk about Enlil and we're going to talk about Marduk. Marduk would be Babylonian, Enlil would be Sumerian. So we're going to talk about some of these other gods, but just notice the link between these things. So we've got one of the themes in this video is going to be gods changing into other gods and becoming known as other gods. So representation and symbolism. The symbol of Asher include a winged disc with horns enclosing 4 circles revolving around a middle circle, rippling rays falling down from either side of the disc, or 2, circle or wheel suspended from wings, and enclosing a warrior drawing his bow to discharge an arrow. Number 3, the same circle with warrior's bow, however, it is carried in his left hand, while the right hand is uplifted as if to bless his worshippers. See picture. So we looked at some of those pictures last time. An Assyrian standard, which probably represented the world column, and we're going to talk about the world column next, has the disc mounted on a bull's head with horns. The upper part of the disc is occupied by a warrior whose head, part of his brow, and the point of his protruded from a circle, whatever. Okay, so we've got a bunch of things. We're going to see the similarities as we go on. I thought the world column was interesting, that concept. So a bit here on the world column, the axis mundi, as it's called. Also cosmic axis, world pillar, center of the world tree. In certain beliefs and philosophies is the world center, or the connection between heaven and earth. As the celestial pole and geographic pole, it expresses a point of connection between sky and earth, where the 4 compass directions meet. At this point, travel and correspondence is made between higher and lower realms. Communication from lower realms may ascend to higher ones, and blessings from higher realms may descend to lower ones and be disseminated to all. The spot functions as the omphalos, navel, of the world's point or beginning. So that's an interesting concept. And some modern expressions here. Axis mundi symbolism continues to be evoked even in modern societies throughout various art forms and has a deep-rooted spiritual inspiration that transcends time. The idea has proved consequential in the realm of architecture. Structures that have spiritual meaning, that inspire and create a connection between the spiritual world and the physical world, that are erected as monuments to commemorate our achievements. That's a weird. It can be considered to be inspired by the axis mundi. The pyramids that have been erected throughout human history serve as perfect examples of axis mundi. A skyscraper, as the term itself suggests the connection of earth and sky, as do spire structures of all sorts. Such buildings can come to be regarded as centers of the inhabited world, or even the world, and serve a habited area, or even the world, and serve as icons of its ideals. So we're going to come back to that concept at the end, but I just thought it was interesting seeing as it came up in this Assyrian bit, the axis mundi, so about skyscrapers and that type of thing. And don't draw any conclusions from what we're reading yet. You can make connections, with things as we go along, but I think the way you have to approach this topic is just absorb the information and don't judge it yet. Don't try to grasp onto it yet, because things will become clearer. Because I think it's one of the mistakes people make, and I've made it in the past as well. When you're looking at this stuff, is you learn something and then you assume that because you've learned that thing that's the truth, whereas it's often more complicated than that. When you see the relationships between things, it often helps you to have a deeper insight into what's actually going on. So there's a concept there. So then on Assyria, I looked up Assyria here, and we go down to the religion bit, and it's got said the Assyrians, like the rest of the Mesopotamian peoples, followed ancient Mesopotamian religion, with their national god Asher having the most importance to them during the Assyrian Empire. This religion gradually declined with the advent of Syriac Christianity between the 1st and 10th centuries. So with regard to Christianity, on Wikipedia, it's not represented well at all. So don't learn your doctrine from Wikipedia. However, let's continue. The major deities worshipped in Assyria include. So I'm going to read some of these things, and we're going to go into some of these gods, but it's just worth noting some of the names, because they will come up. So Adad Anu, or An, god of heaven and sky. We'll get into that. Considered father of the great gods. Stories is mentioned. So Dagon or Dagon. I'm not going to talk about him, but he's in the Bible as well. Enki or Ea, god of the Abzu. Ishtar, Inanna Astarte, who is the queen of heaven. We'll get to that. Marduk, we've talked about already, the patron deity of Babylon, who eventually became regarded as the head of the Babylonian pantheon. Nabu, Nanshi, Nergal, Ninurta, Ishok, Nisku, Shamsa or Utu. We're going to talk about Utu. Sin or Nana, god of the moon. Tammuz. We're going to talk about Tammuz as well. So there's just some names. You see those names on the screen? Some of the Assyrian pantheon. So just interesting to note those things. Some of the gods there are not Assyrian. They come from other places. It's worth noting there's at least in that list Babylonian and Sumerian gods. So I'm going to read a bit now from Jeremiah 50. The word that the Lord spake against Babylon and against the land of the Chaldeans by Jeremiah the prophet. Declare ye among the nations, and publish, and set up a standard. Publish, and conceal not. Say, Babylon is taken, Bel is confounded, Merodach is broken in pieces. Her idols are confounded, her images are broken in pieces. So, two names mentioned there, Bel and Merodach. Who is that? If we go to Merodach, disambiguation, Merodach may refer to Bel Merodach, or Merodach, an alternative name for Marduk, we've mentioned before, a Mesopotamian god. So, that's worth noting. And Bel, which I guess I can read it now, is also Marduk. Firstly, we'll take this a bit by bit, because it's a complicated topic and it was difficult to arrange the order in which I was going to do these things, so we'll just go through it as I've prepared it. But just remember the name Bel. In short, that means Lord, and it's a name for Marduk. Okay, so we get to Marduk. Marduk, uniform, Sumerian, calf of the sun, solar calf. So we've got the bull and the calf references there. Greek hero, was a late generation god from ancient Mesopotamia and patron deity of the city of Babylon. When Babylon became the political center of the Euphrates Valley in the time of Hammurabi, he slowly started to rise to the position of the head of the Babylonian pantheon, a position he fully acquired by the second half of the second millennium BC. So it's interesting that he wasn't originally the head of the Babylonian pantheon, he slowly rose to that position, which is weird for a god, you might say. The name Marduk was probably pronounced Marutuk. The etymology of the name Marduk is conjectured as derived from Amar Utu, immortal son of Utu, or bull calf of the sun god Utu, and we're going to talk about Utu. The origin of Marduk's name may reflect an earlier genealogy or have had cultural ties to the ancient city of Sippar, so to a city again, whose god was Utu. So Utu is related to the city of Sippar. Interesting. Dating to the 3rd millennium BC, by the Hammurabi period, Marduk had become astrologically associated with the planet Jupiter. Wasn't originally associated, had become associated. So that city there, Sippar, just one little bit on there. Sippar was the cult site of the sun god, Sumerian Utu, Akkadian Shamash. And these names, as we'll get into, the names mean a whole variety of different gods depending on which culture you're talking about. And I didn't look up who Shamash was, but it might be Marduk, I can't remember. Anyway, I might look that up, put it on the screen. And the home of his temple Aberaba. So that's Sippar. Mythology. This is in Marduk's mythology, Babylonian. Marduk's original character is obscure, but he was later associated with water, vegetation, judgment, and magic. His consort was the goddess Sarpanit, and he was also regarded as the son of Ea, Sumerian Enki, and Damkina, and the heir of Anu. We're going to talk about Anu later. But whatever special traits Marduk may have had were overshadowed by the political development through which the Euphrates Valley passed, and which led people of the time, imbuing him with traits belonging to gods who in earlier period were recognized as the heads of the pantheon. So he was the head of the pantheon, but but he usurped previous gods to become the head of the pantheon. There are particularly two gods, Ea and Enlil, we're going to talk about Enlil, whose powers and attributes pass over to Marduk. In the case of Ea, the transfer proceeded pacifically, without effacing the older god. Marduk took over the entity of Asaluhi, the son of Ea, god magic, so that Marduk was integrated into the pantheon of Eridu, where both Ea and Asaluhi originally came from. So it was integrated into the pantheon of Eridu. Eridu, in Sumerian mythology, was said to be one of the 5 cities built before the deluge occurred, before the flood. So we're talking about another city as well. But now we're going back to antediluvian times. We have a connection going back. So we've started at Asher, and we've seen a bunch of other things. We're seeing that Marduk seems to have been the precursor to Asher. Asher being the Assyrian god, and Marduk being the Babylonian. But then there's also a connection here to a city which was an antediluvian city. So we're just making mental notes of this. So now we get down to Bel. During the first millennium BC, the Babylonians worshipped a deity under the title Bel, meaning Lord, who was a syncretization, and we're going to get to what syncretization is later, of Marduk and Lil and the dying god Dumutzid. We're going to get to Dumutzid as well. Bel held all the cultic titles of Enlil, and his status in the Babylonian religion was largely the same. Eventually, Bel came to be seen as the god of order and destiny. The cult of Bel is a major component of the Jewish story Bel and the Dragon, from the apocryphal additions to Daniel. It's only a short story if you want to read it. It's in the Apocrypha. So Bel is similar to the word Baal or Baal, which also means Lord. So now a bit more on Bel. During the first millennium... Oh, sorry, I already read that bit. So, Utu. I mentioned Utu previously. Where did I mention it previously? So Marduk was supposedly the son of Utu. So Utu. Later worshipped by the East Semitic peoples as Shamash. So Utu is Shamash, that was mentioned earlier as well. Is the ancient Mesopotamian god of the sun, justice, morality, and truth, and twin brother of the goddess Inanna, the Queen of Heaven. So we're going to get to the Queen of Heaven. So Inanna is one of the names for the Queen of Heaven. His main temples were in the cities of Sippar, which we talked about previously, and Lhasa. So we're getting associated with cities. He was believed to ride through the heavens in his sun chariot and see all things that happened in the day. He was enforcer of divine justice and was thought to aid those in distress. According to Sumerian mythology, he helped protect Dumutzid when the Gala demons tried to drag him to the underworld, and he appeared to the hero Zuisudra after the Great Flood. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, he helps Gilgamesh defeat the ogre Hamaba. So, in Sumerian mythology, he helped... We're going to talk about Dumutzid, and we're going to talk about Gala demons. So, we're talking about Sumerian now. So, Sumer would be the civilization that was before Babylon. As I understand it, the Sumerians were the first civilization after the flood, as I understand it. So this would have been before the Tower of Babel. I'm not 100% on this. I haven't done a super amount of research on this. It's an idea. It seems to be the case because it makes sense. What else would have been before Babylon? It could only have been one civilization. So I think it was the Sumerians. They seem to be the oldest, the first post-flood civilization. So, where are we up to now? So we're going to talk about Dumutzid and Gala, but let's keep reading for family here. Utu was the twin brother of Inanna, the Queen of Heaven, whose domain encompassed a broad variety of different powers. In Sumerian texts, Inanna and Utu are shown as extremely close. In fact, their relationship frequently borders on incestuous. Utu is usually the son of Nanna, the god of the moon, and his wife Ningal, but is sometimes also described as the son of An or Enlil. So we're going to look at the family tree. I closed all the windows I had open. I'll have to open it again. So we're going to look at the family tree now of Utu, because it's quite interesting to see how all of these gods are related. So also have to look at some pictures. We won't get to that later. I think that's, where is that in my notes? Yes, it's a bit later. So we're going to look at the family tree. So if you look at the family tree of Utu, you see Utu down there, sort of near the bottom. Up the top is An, and then we get to, you go down sort of the right side, and you get to Enlil, sort of close to the right there, and then go down through a couple there, and there's Utu down there. But it's just interesting to note that the gods have a family tree, and we're going to talk about Enlil, and we're going to talk about An coming up. But just, and there's Dumutsid as well to the left of Utu. And there's Inanna, the Queen of Heaven as well. But just interesting to note these things. The gods seem to have a family tree, and also interesting to note how the god that is supposedly the god, the creator of everything, seems to be passed down from generation to generation. It's a strange characteristic of a god, you might say. So just noticing these things. Okay, iconography. In Sumerian texts, Utu is described as a bearded or long-armed. In art, he is shown as an old man with a long beard. He's believed to have emerged from the doors of heaven every day at dawn and ride across the sky in his chariot before returning to the interior of heaven through a set of doors in the far west every evening. Utu's charioteer was named Bunin, doesn't matter, blah, blah, blah. That's the bit I wanted to talk about. Utu's main symbol was the solar disk, a circle with 4 points in each of the cardinal directions, and 4 wavy diagonal lines emanating from the circle between each point. The symbol represents light, warmth, and power of the sun. So if we look at that picture there, the one in particular is the one that's the circle with it looks like a star and then the wavy lines coming out. Just interesting if you compare that to some of the crosses. A cross. It looks like a cross, like the Templar cross, kind of like that, and there's just similar designs. But we're talking about now going back to Sumeria, and then on the right there of that male figure in the Syrian winged sun emblem. Northwest Palace of Nimrod, 9th century, blah blah blah. Ignore the dates. So just interesting to note that. So moving on. The Queen of Heaven. We're going to do the Queen of Heaven next. So just going to read a bit out of the Bible first, Jeremiah 44. Moreover, Jeremiah said unto all the people and to all the women, hear the word of the Lord, all Judah that are in the land of Egypt. Thus saith the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, saying, Ye and your wives have both spoken with your mouths and fulfilled with your hands, saying, We will surely perform our vows that we have vowed, to burn incense to the Queen of Heaven, and to pour out drink offerings unto her. Ye will surely accomplish your vows, and surely perform your vows. Therefore hear ye the word of the Lord, all Judah that dwell in the land of Egypt. Behold, I have sworn by my great name, saith the Lord, that my name shall no more be named in the mouth of any man of Judah in all the land of Egypt, saying, The Lord God liveth. So there's a bit about the Queen of Heaven. Now, a bit on Wikipedia about the Queen of Heaven. It was a title given to a number of ancient sky goddesses worshipped throughout the ancient Mediterranean and Near East during ancient times. Goddesses known to have been referred to by the title include Inanna, Anat, Isis, Ishtar, Astarte, Ashtgik, and possibly Asherah by the prophet Jeremiah. So that Asherah by the prophet Jeremiah, that's the Queen of Heaven that we just read, chapter 44 there. In Greco-Roman times, Hera and her Roman aspect Juno bore this title. Forms and content of worship varied. In modern times, the title Queen of Heaven is still used by contemporary pagans to refer to the great goddess, while Catholics, Orthodox, and some Anglican Christians now apply the ancient title to Mary, the mother of Jesus, because we know the Catholic Church is a whore. So, Dumutsid. So, earlier we read, I think it was Utu. We read how, where are we now? Yeah, Hutu, who is the father of, son, hold on. It's so complicated. Pausing 1 second. Yeah, Marduk was the son of Utu. So Marduk was the son of Utu, and Utu was the one who helped protect Dumutzid when the Gala demons tried to drag him to the underworld. So now we're talking about Dumutzid, just a bit on him. Dumutzid was later known by the alternate form Tammuz, is an ancient Mesopotamian god associated with shepherds, who was also the primary consort of the goddess Inanna, later known as Ishtar, the queen of heaven. In Sumerian mythology, Dumutzid's sister was Geshitinana, the goddess of vegetation. In the Sumerian king list, Dumutzid is listed as an antediluvian king of the city of Badtibara and also early king of the city of Uruk. So, noticing again, this is a god of a city, and also that this is antediluvian. So we're seeing that this passing along of the titles of the god status, you might say, goes all the way back to antediluvian times, and yet it's still also associated with cities. That's interesting to know. So a bit from the Bible about Tammuz. Ezekiel 8. Then he brought me to the door of the gate of the Lord's house, which was toward the north, and behold, there sat women weeping for Tammuz. Then he said unto me, Hast thou seen this, O son of man? Turn thee yet again, and thou shalt see greater abominations than these. And he brought me into the inner court of the Lord's house, and behold, the door of the temple of the Lord, between the porch and the altar, were about 25 men, with their backs towards the temple of the Lord, and their faces toward the east, and they worshipped the sun toward the east. That's interesting. We're talking about Tammuz there, and we're talking about the worship of the sun. So Gallo, we're talking about the Gala demons. This is, Utu tried to protect Dumutzid when the Gala demons tried to drag him to the underworld. Dumutzid seems to have been, a previous version. Seemed to be a previous version of the gods. And there were these demons. What are these Gala demons? So antediluvian times we're talking about now. Where are we? In Sumerian and ancient Mesopotamian religion, Galus were great demons or devils of the ancient Mesopotamian underworld. The role in mythology, Galu demons hauled unfortunate victims off to the underworld. They were one of the 7 devils, or the offspring of hell, of Babylonian theology that could be appeased by the sacrifice of a lamb at their altars. So it's quite interesting, the sacrifice of a lamb. If you were Satan, if you were the satanic side of religion, then you might view God as the bad guy. If you considered yourself to be the good guy. We're talking about 7 devils. Well, there are seven spirits of God, and we see a couple of representations of that. And we know that in the antediluvian times there were the mighty men, and they had evil in their heart continually. And so I'm just going to pause for a second. I'm just getting to the 33 minutes, so I had to pause. So we know that the antediluvian times, as the mighty men of old, and they were evil, so God flooded the earth. And so I'm just going to read a bit here from Jude. And the angels which kept not their first estate, but left their own habitation, he hath reserved in everlasting chains under darkness, unto the judgment of the great day. And if we go to Revelation 1, Jesus talking about how he's got the 7 stars and the golden candlesticks, and he explains it in verse 20. The mystery of the 7 stars, which thou sawest in my right hand, and the 7 golden candlesticks. The 7 stars are the angels of the 7 churches, and the 7 candlesticks which thou sawest are the 7 churches. So we're talking about 7 spirits there. In Isaiah 11, there's also 7 spirits of God mentioned. There shall come forth a rod out of the stem of Jesse, and a branch shall grow out of his roots. And the Spirit of the Lord shall rest upon him, the Spirit of wisdom and understanding, the Spirit of counsel and might, the Spirit of knowledge and the fear of the Lord. So it could be said that what's we're talking about here with Dumutzid as a antediluvian mighty man, the 7 spirits of God, or the spirits of God who are 7 demons of hell who dragged him to the underworld. So you could say that that's what's going on there. Just interesting to think about these things. So now we get to Enlil, who I've mentioned a couple of times. Enlil, later known as Elil, is an ancient Mesopotamian god associated with wind, air, earth, and storms. Interesting, wind, air, earth, and storms. From Ephesians 2, I'll just read a couple of bits. And you he hath quickened, who were dead in trespass and sins, wherein in time past ye walked according to the course of this world, according to the prince of the power of the air, and the spirit that now worketh in the children of disobedience. Spirit that worketh in. The spirit is a spirit that now worketh in the children of disobedience. Interesting. Spirit. Among whom also we had our conversation in times past in the lust of our flesh, fulfilling the desires of the flesh and of the mind. And we're by nature the children of wrath, even as others. It's interesting. So anyway, I've got this Enlil associated with the wind, air, earth, and storms. He is first attested as the chief deity of the Sumerian pantheon, but he was later worshipped by the Akkadians, Babylonians, Assyrians, and Hurrians. Enlil's primary center of worship was the Ekur temple in the city of Nippur, which was believed to have been built by Enlil himself. Interesting, a god building a city. And was regarded as the mooring rope of heaven and earth. Mooring rope of heaven and earth. We've talked about that before with the, what's it called? The Axis Mundi, the world column. Where are we? He is also sometimes referred to in Sumerian text as Nunamir. According to one Sumerian hymn, Enlil himself was so holy that not even the other gods could look upon him. And Enlil, so it's interesting because we can't look upon our Father in heaven because we're sinful and he would burn us up because he's consuming fire. Just interesting to note that. According to one Sumerian hymn, Enlil himself was so holy. Read that a bit. Enlil rose to prominence during the 24th century BC. Ignore the dates. The rise of Nippur. Fell in decline after Nippur was sacked by the Elamites. Eventually supplanted as the chief god of Mesopotamian pantheon by the Babylonian national god Marduk. The Babylonian god Bel was a syncretic deity of Enlil. Remember that term again, syncretic. We're going to get to that. Marduk and the dying god Dumutzid. So we've got all these different gods associated. As Dumutzid associated as well as syncretic. They're joined together. They seem to be different versions of each other. Enlil plays a vital role in the Sumerian creation myth. He separates An, heaven, and Ki, earth, thus making the world habitable for humans. So I'm just going to read a bit from Genesis 1 now. In the beginning, God created the heaven and earth, and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And God saw the light that it was good, and divided the light from the darkness. And God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And the evening and the morning were the first day. And God said, "Let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters." And God made the firmament, and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament. And it was so. And he called the firmament heaven, and the evening and the morning were the second day. So it's just interesting how this god Enlil, it seems to have characteristics of both Satan and God, which is not surprising, I suppose, if it's satanic derived. Anyway, in the Sumerian flood myth, Enlil rewards Zizadur with immortality, In the Babylonian flood myth, Enlil is cause of the flood himself, having sent the flood to exterminate the human race who made too much noise and prevented him from sleeping. I thought that was kind of amusing, but anyway, that's again taking the form of the Father, Jehovah. So we have this god Enlil as a creator god, separated the heavens and the earth, sent the flood. I thought it was just funny, that bit. Made too much noise and prevented him from sleeping. I guess that's an insult to the Father. But anyway, I thought that was funny. Etymology. Enlil's name comes from the ancient Sumerian En, meaning Lord, and Lil, meaning wind. His name therefore translates as Lord Wind, Prince of the power of the air. Enlil's name is not a genitive construction, indicating Enlil was seen as the personification of wind itself, rather than merely the cause of the wind. Iconography. Enlil was not represented anthropomorphically in Mesopotamian iconography. Instead, he was represented by a horned cap, which consisted of up to 7 superimposed pairs of ox horns. Such crowns were an important symbol of divinity. Gods had been shown wearing them ever since the 3rd millennium BC. The horned cap remained consistent in form and meaning from the earliest days of Sumerian prehistory up until the time of the Persian conquest and beyond. So it's interesting, the horns, because of course in Daniel and in Revelation we've got the beast and the horns on the beast. So I thought that was an interesting connection there. So War of the Gods, a badly damaged text from the Neo-Assyrian period, describes Marduk leading his army of Anunnaki, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, into the sacred city of Nippur and causing a disturbance. The disturbances causes a flood, which forces the resident gods of Nippur under the leadership of Enlil to take shelter in the Eshu-Mesha temple to Ninurta. Enlil is enraged at Marduk's transgression and orders the gods of Eshu-Mesha to take Marduk and the other Anunnaki as prisoners. The Anunnaki are captured, but Marduk appoints his forerunner Meshush to lead a revolt against the gods of Eshu-Mesha and sends his messages, don't worry about the names, sends his messages to Nerigitmir to alert Nabu, the god of literacy. When the Eshu-Mesha gods hear Nabu speak, they come out of the temple to search for him. Marduk defeats the Eshu-Mesha gods and takes 360 of them as prisoners of war, including Enlil himself. Enlil protests that Enu-Mesha gods are innocent, so Marduk puts them on trial before the Anunnaki. So it's talking about gods here, but doesn't it sound just similar to people? I mean, if this was a history of people, and we're talking about gods who lived in cities, but if it was just people who lived in cities, instead of gods, it was just kings, let's say, we can sort of see how that story, it's a weird story for gods to be participating in, isn't it? But it makes sense. I mean, of course, we know as Christians that there's only one God, but it's an interesting story. It sounds to me like people. It sounds to me like this is the story of people. So now we get to Anu. Now, if you remember the family tree I showed you earlier, Anu, or An, was the top, the first. It's the divine personification of the sky, supreme god, and ancestor of all the deities in ancient Mesopotamian region. Anu was believed to be the supreme source of all authority for the other gods and for all mortal rulers. And he is described in one text as the one who contains the entire universe. He is identified with the north ecliptic pole centered in the constellation Draco, and, along with his sons Enlil and Enki, constitutes the highest divine triad, personifying the 3 bands of constellations of the vault of the sky. By the time of the earliest written records, Anu was rarely worshipped, and veneration was instead devoted to his son Enlil. But throughout Mesopotamian history, the highest deity in the pantheon was always said to possess the Anutu, meaning heavenly power. Anu's primary role in myths is as the ancestor of the Anunnaki, the major deities of the Sumerian religion. His primary cult center was the Eanna temple in the city of Uruk, but by the Akkadian period, his authority in Uruk had largely been ceded to the goddess Inanna, the Queen of Heaven. So just interesting there, talking about an ancient, the most ancient. So it sort of reminds me, if we were to make the connection and say these people who are so-called gods, they're just people. Well, Anu or An, we're talking about the first. I mean, that could be Noah, or that could be Adam. That's the connection I'm making there. And where do I talk about the Anunnaki? We'll keep reading on a little bit. And so just note these things. I guess also, we're talking about the constellations, the constellation Draco, and all these other things. But what seems to be the consistent, because there's a lot of sun worship as well. What seems to be the case, we're talking about what sounds like people, these so-called gods, they sound like people. But then they're also personified as the sun or the moon or constellations, planets, or your stars. Because I don't think there are planets, there are stars. But anyway, it's interesting to make all these connections. And so then looking at the Sumerian religion and the Sumerian pantheon, major deities, the majority of Sumerian deities belong to a classification called the Anunna, offspring of An, whereas 7 deities, including Enlil and Inanna, belong to a group of underworld judges known as the Anunnaki, offspring of the An plus Ki. During the third dynasty of the Sumerian pantheon was said to include 60 times 60, 600 deities. So interesting. And I think I missed a bit, so just give me 1 second. Because I just wanted to talk about the Anunnaki, and I had mentioned them, but I was going to read a bit. I looked up the Wikipedia for Anunnaki. So the Anunnaki, also transcribed as Anunnaki, Anunua, but other variations, are a group of deities that appear in the mythological traditions of the ancient Sumerians, Akkadians, Assyrians, and Babylonians. Description of how many Anunnaki there were and what role they fulfilled are inconsistent and often contradictory. In earliest Sumerian writings about them, which come from the post-Akkadian period, the Anunnaki are the most powerful deities in the pantheon, descendants of An and Ki, the earth and the sky, and the god of the heavens and the goddess of the earth, and their primary function is to decree the fates of humanity. So, when you hear the Anunnaki, what we're talking about is basically, as I understand it, it's just the people, our descendants. It's talking about our descendants. So it seems to be the case that these people were just personified as gods. Our ancestors were personified as gods in these religions. That seems to be what the case. And so I talked about syncretism and the syncretic religions. I'm just going to read a bit here. Syncretism is the combining of different beliefs while blending practices of various schools of thought. Syncretism involves the merging or assimilation of several originally discrete traditions, especially in the theology and mythology of religion, thus asserting an underlying unity and allowing for an inclusive approach to other faiths. So that seems to be what's going on here with it. We're just, as the cultures change, there seems to be a continuation of something. This is why I sort of call it Mystery Babylon. This is why it's called Mystery Babylon. And you've seen the connection with the Queen of Heaven in the Catholic Church. And so I think Mystery Babylon, we're talking about something that's sort of been passed down. It's sort of the same tradition, the pagan traditions, it's sort of been passed down for a long time, let's say, probably since the Tower of Babel. And I just thought it was interesting, if you've read the Game of Thrones, I read the Song of Ice and Fire. In that series of books, there is the many-faced God. I'm just going to read a bit about the many-faced God from the Game of Thrones fandom.com. The faceless men worship death, who they believe is the only God. The cult is actually a syncretic religion. Its followers believe that death is unknowingly worshipped by devotees of all the religions in the world, simply under different names. Every religion either has a god of death in polytheistic faiths, or has a god with dominion over death in monotheistic faiths. The faithless men believe that all of these gods are simply different aspects, or faces, through which death has revealed himself to humanity. Hence they formally refer to their deity as the many-faced god. There is no one symbol of the many-faced god, simply the icons used to represent death gods in other religions. So I think that's quite an interesting, I make that comparison, like the god of death. Who is the god of death in the Christian understanding? Well, if there is a god of death, it would be Satan. The god of... he's the one that takes people to die. Could be seen as the son of perdition, perhaps. And well, we're going to get to that later. So just interesting to know. I thought it was an interesting comparison. And as far as the gods of old being real people, there's a Ken Johnson video, which I might cut out a bit and put it in here, but he talks about how what's this called? After the flood, he talks about how the gods were real people. And so I'm just going to, I'll cut a little bit out of this thing and I'll put it in here, but then I recommend you go watch the video.
But there's a section, I thought it was interesting. Again, if you go back to the old chronicles of the Anglo-Saxons with England, there's actually 5 different very ancient scrolls that will run them back to Noah. They go all the way back to a guy that colonized the entire planet. He survived a flood. Usually they have different names. Sometimes it's very, very similar to Noah. Noah, something like that. And he would have so many generations. My family is from Denmark. And in Denmark, we anciently worshipped Thor and Odin and those guys. And what's interesting about it is I found record that apparently Odin was 20th generation from Noah through Japheth. And apparently he was a very mighty king, or he wouldn't have all this legend behind him. And so it's interesting how my people, even up as far as the 1100s AD, were still sacrificing on a temple off the island. And it's just kind of interesting to see those things. I always thought it was interesting, though, if you were a pagan and you worshipped Odin, and you know what the legends are. One of the legends is that Odin was trying to get more power through his sorcery, and something happened, and he had his eye pecked out. Okay, so that story right there tells me apparently he's not the almighty creator. Why was he trying to get more powerful? And how did the creator have an accident and get his eye pecked out? Trying to get more. It's just interesting. I mean, at that point, I might still believe in Odin, but I ought to say, I bet you there's somebody higher than Odin. Just logical. And again, that's the same type of stuff that the church fathers would do. Okay, well, let's assume that that's right, but he couldn't have been the original. Well, I guess not. I can show you who the original guy is. And then we can go back in records and find your God, and maybe even find where he's buried, because he's not a god. Sorry.
Okay, so that's just a bit of that. So you can watch the video if you want to learn a bit more about that. So I'm just going to read you a bit more scripture now. Genesis 11, and the whole earth was of one language and of one speech. And it came to pass, as they journeyed from the east, they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. And they said to one another, Go to, let us make brick, and burn them thoroughly. And they had brick for stone, and slime they had for mortar. And they said, Go to, let us build us a city and a tower, whose top may reach unto heaven. And let us make a name, that we may be, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth. Let us make a name, lest we be scattered abroad upon the whole earth. It's interesting. They're building high things, and they wanted to make a name for themselves. And then, of course, God came down and confounded the languages and split them up. So, a bit from Ephesians 6. Put on the whole armour of God, that you may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. So it's interesting that there seems to be some consistency throughout all of these religions, and of course extending right into modern day and Catholicism. It seems to be some, in a sense, some consistency with the worship and the deification of, the sun and the moon and that type of thing. But different people, different gods worship the whole time. So it's interesting to note there, we don't wrestle against flesh and blood, not against flesh and blood. And as I think we've established, the people in all of these religions, Anu and Marduk and Asher, and these are all people. They seem to be all people. So we're not wrestling against flesh and blood, so that makes you wonder, what's the spirit behind this? Well, if we go to Luke 22, then entered Satan into Judas, named Iscariot, being of the number of the 12. So Satan entered into Judas. Interesting. And go down to 31 and 32. And the Lord said, Simon, Simon, behold, Satan hath desired to have you, that he may sift you as wheat. But I have prayed for you, that thy faith fail not. And when thou art converted, strengthen thy brethren. Interesting. Satan wanted Peter as well. I think I mentioned this in the last video, or one of the previous videos. But Jesus prayed for him because he had faith. So if you have faith, Satan can't enter into you because Jesus will pray for you. So John 17, and now I am no more in the world, but these are in the world, and I come to thee. Holy Father, keep through thine own name those who thou hast given me, that they may be as one as we are. While I was with them in the world, I kept them in thy name. Those which thou gavest me, I have kept. And none of them is lost, but the son of perdition, that the scripture might be fulfilled. The son of perdition is lost. Well, who's that? Well, we just read about Judas Iscariot being possessed by Satan. So does that mean Judas Iscariot is the son of perdition? Or does that mean Satan who entered into him is the son of perdition? Well, if we read Thessalonians chapter 2, 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, now we beseech you, brethren, by the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ, by our gathering together unto him, that ye be not soon shaken in mind, or be troubled, neither by spirit, nor by word, nor by letter as from us, that the day of Christ is at hand. Let no man deceive you by any means, for that day shall not come, except there come a falling away first, and that man of sin be revealed, the son of perdition. Interesting. So in John 7, we've got the son of perdition. It seems to be the case that we're talking of, Satan entered Judas, and he was the one that Jesus lost. So, son of perdition, who opposeth and exalteth himself above all that is called God, or that is worshipped, so that he as God sitteth in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. Interesting. Just making note of these things. It's becoming a long video, so I'm not going to talk too much about this, but these are interesting connections. I'm sure you, I hope you feel that way as well. So then, of course, we've got Revelation 9, verse 11. And they had a king over them, which is the angel of the bottomless pit, whose name in the Hebrew tongue is Abaddon, but in the Greek tongue hath his name Apollyon. Interesting. Abaddon, Apollyon. Of course, we know Apollo is Greek, a Greek sun god. So that's interesting. And we know that 9/11, something very interesting happened on 9/11, which I'm sure you all remember in 2001. And so, what next? So now, there were 2 buildings destroyed in 9/11, and there was a new building built in that same spot. And we've talked about the Axis Mundi, building the high things up into heaven. Now we have the One World Trade Center. And as this is becoming a long video, I'm not going to read anything. I'm just going to put it on the screen. But as you notice, there is a connection. There seems to be a high place that has been built. It was destroyed on a date which you could associate with Apollyon, which is associated with the sun god. And so there you go, just interesting in New York. And I will leave you with a picture, seeing as it's probably about time I end this video. This will be the longest I've ever done. A picture of a man and his family, his close family. It's interesting to note that throughout history, so we seem to have, there's a lot of sun gods, and then there's the wife of the sun god, and that would be the moon, and there's often a sun involved as well. And we didn't get too much into, you can go for years and years researching this subject. There are so many connections, there's so many religions, there's so many variations on the truth, but I've sort of tried to give you some idea of what we're talking about and what we're talking about with Mystery Babylon. So, a bunch of things to think about. I'll have to process this, and I'll maybe make some more videos, but I hope this video has brought some things up, and I hope this has been interesting for you. I will see where we go from here, but be careful in your search for truth. Stay close to Jesus. May Jesus bless you and lead you to the truth. Amen.